I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. President Trump has named digital strategist Brad Parscale as his campaign manager for his re-election bid in 2020. Parscale was key to the Trump campaign's digital operations in 2016. Several Democratic lawmakers last year asked for information related to his work for Trump, saying his firm had not turned over documents related to Russian contacts or WikiLeaks. President Trump's advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has had his security clearance downgraded. That's according to Politico. Kushner reportedly was not singled out. Other White House aides also saw their clearances downgraded. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says DOJ officials believe they can ban rapid-fire bump stock devices without action from Congress. That comes after President Trump ordered the Justice Department to work toward banning those devices, which allow semi-automatic rifles to mimic machine guns. Puerto Rico says delays by the Treasury Department in getting disaster relief to the island have put the U.S. territory in a, quote, dangerous financial dilemma. The island's governor says the Treasury imposed restrictions that made it difficult to access funding. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg, and Bloomberg Technology is next.
And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Amazon arrives at your front door after a $1 billion deal to buy smart home tech company Ring. How this plays into the e-commerce giant's larger delivery strategy. Plus, Comcast reaches for Sky and raises the stakes for Disney and Fox. The all-out bidding war erupting between three of the biggest players in media. And Fitbit activity hits an all-time low. Fitbit CEO James Park joins us ahead as shares tank post-earnings. But first, to our lead. Amazon has agreed to buy Ring, a California-based smart home company that makes video cameras, doorbells, and other security tech. The deal is valued at about $1 billion and helps push Amazon further into the smart home market. According to people familiar with the matter, JPMorgan Chase advised Ring on this deal. Joining us now with more details, our Bloomberg IPO and deals reporter Alex Barinka. And it wasn't too long ago that Ring was booted off of Shark Tank.
It wasn't. Just 5 years ago, this company, the CEO, went into Shark Tank, asked for about $700,000, said he was valued at $7 million with an M, and now fast forward half a decade later, they're selling for $1 billion, according to a person familiar with the matter, to Amazon. So a nice little ending here for Ring. Perhaps can look back to some of the sharks and say, look at what we've done. But for Amazon, it's an important step as they kind of continue to push into these more consumer-facing hardware. We've seen Amazon in the past 6 months or so really try to really embed themselves in consumers' homes. You saw it with Amazon Key, that key where you can unlock it for delivery folks so they can deliver their packages. And you've seen it with Amazon Echo. And this seems to kind of fit nicely within that entire ecosystem, because you know what? Amazon's end goal isn't necessarily selling hardware. It's getting that hardware in so they can sell more products on its e-commerce platforms and get you to open your pocketbook a little bit more.
Talk to us a little bit about this, how this fits into the delivery strategy. You know, obviously, Amazon has been really focused on that last mile. Now they have this concierge service Key where Amazon can actually go into your home and drop off packages. How does it tie together?
So when you use a Ring smart camera, you can actually have the person on the ground talk to it. If you're on your phone or your tablet or your PC, you can talk back. So that kind of actual relationship where you're not just a passive watcher, you can actually engage with the person who's there. So if it's an Amazon delivery person who they say is verified, you can open the door for them, tell them where to leave something. But also Amazon's been pushing services like house cleaning and dog walking. So anyone who's showing up at your door can potentially be let inside when you're not there. Again, so you keep spending within that broader Amazon platform.
What did you make of the price of this deal? I mean, I full disclosure, I own a Ring doorbell, and I was shocked. I mean, the product is good, but $1 billion?
There were reports out there from last year from some other tech media organizations saying they were valued at around $450 million. So that's a 2-time bump. So it's a nice exit here. For Amazon, it's a small check size. The person familiar with the matter told me that JP Morgan advised Ring. Amazon didn't even have an advisor working with them. They basically just shelled out the money for this deal. So it seems to be kind of another one of these kind of small bolt-ons that Amazon has been collecting as it continues to fill this kind of set of tools it has to keep getting into people's homes.
And they, of course, did a big deal with Whole Foods last year. Do you think Amazon is going to be more acquisitive in the future?
I can tell you now, covering tech M&A, they're definitely number one on my list. We are waiting for the next big deal from them. Don't have anything in the hopper that I know about right now. Doesn't mean that couldn't always change, but even the Whole Foods deal fits into the strategy perfectly. Whole Foods shows up with your food. You talk to your Ring camera, you get them in the door. Brava.
All right, Alex Barinka, our deals reporter, thank you so much for breaking that one down. All right, now in earnings news, Square reported fourth quarter sales that topped analyst estimates for a 9th consecutive quarter. This was bolstered by a steady increase in larger merchants using the company to process payments and manage their businesses. In more than 2 years as a public company, Square has moved beyond its iconic payments dongle to become a one-stop business manager for small and mid-sized retailers, providing loans, accounting, inventory tracking, and e-commerce operations, among other services. Coming up, shares of Fitbit hit an all-time low on disappointing earnings and forecasts. So what is next for the wearables company? We'll hear from Fitbit CEO James Park. That is next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. A new note from Evercore ISI healthcare analyst Michael Neuschel takes a closer look at Apple's health unit. According to Neuschel, Apple's plan to start on-site medical clinics for its workers may go beyond just its own employees if it succeeds. This comes after a CNBC report that said Apple was starting clinics for its workers. Remember, CEO Tim Cook told investors earlier this month that the company can make a significant contribution to the healthcare space. Well, Fitbit's longer-term outlook is facing challenges amidst falling demand. Shares hit a new all-time low Tuesday on disappointing earnings results. So what is the next step? Let's get straight to our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson, who is standing by in New York. Corey?
Yes, I am, Emily Chang. Thank you very much. Fitbit, big quarter for the company, and not a great quarter, at least according to Wall Street. The stock selling off today. James Park, the CEO, joined us quite a bit. And James, you care more about the stock than I do. But in terms of just the size of the company, what the opportunity is, if you'd asked, I think, either one of us 2 years ago if Fitbit's fourth quarter sales would ever be below $700 million, it's hard to imagine that they would fall in the last quarter to $571 million. What's going on with demand for Fitbit products?
2017, Corey, was definitely a challenging year. It played out a lot differently than we expected. For us in the wearables category, the shift from basic activity trackers to more fully featured smartwatches is happening even faster than we anticipated. We did launch our first smartwatch, Fitbit Ionic, into the category in Q4, and it did outsell our prior highest ASP product, Surge, but it was not the mass appeal unit shipment driver that we anticipated. And that was reflected in our financials, and that's what investors are reacting to.
Yeah, it strikes me as a really interesting problem. I mean, when I looked at the Apple Watch, which launched after Fitbit, it was a product in search of a use case. And I felt like Fitbit was the use case. It was monitor steps, help people live healthier lives, and sort of an athletic, or at least a physical fitness focused product. As you move from bands that just counted steps, or steps in altitude or whatever, to watches that can do a lot more, do you start to lose that focus? How do you make it a mass market product, not just for runners or triathletes, but for people that just want to lose 10 pounds?
No, absolutely. I think we will maintain our focus on health and fitness, even as our emphasis in the category shifts from trackers to smartwatches, and a lot of that is going to come in the product features. There's a lot of specific health and fitness apps. The long battery life of over 4 days helps a lot, especially with sleep tracking. And our app is the #1 app on iTunes and Android for health and fitness. Platform independence plays a key role, especially as we try to integrate more deeply into the healthcare ecosystem. So I still strongly believe that the focus on health and fitness, regardless of what device type, is the winning strategy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and even in 2017, while Ionic wasn't the success that we anticipated, we actually achieved a lot as a company. We did meet our full year guidance and earnings. They're in line with guidance. We actually exceeded our projections for free cash flow, and we were incredibly operationally efficient. We ended up with OpEx that was over $50 million below our target that we had stated to investors. We deepened our reach in healthcare. And I think one of the more interesting aspects, if you think about not just devices, but our active user base actually grew to over 25 million users, even if our unit shipments declined.
I was about to ask that. What's the dynamic there? How do you ship fewer products but have more users? I didn't understand that.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that investors had actually been concerned about in the past is what is our level of retention and usage? Like, is this a product that people buy and put in their drawer after a few weeks or a few months? I think what we're demonstrating is that even though unit shipments declined and our active user base grew, that means that we're actually getting better at getting people to stay longer on our devices and our platform. And that's actually going to be important as we start to shift our business model from being device-centric to one that's more around software, paid services, and LTV.
Yeah, so let's talk about that too, about the shift of the business model. For a long time, it seemed that the real sort of leg up in terms of unit sales might be the corporate market, might be going into a big company and getting everyone there to wear a Fitbit. At our company, in fact, at Bloomberg, if you monitor your steps using a Fitbit and using another application, you get credit towards buying stuff for little gift cards and so on. Now you're talking a lot about healthcare. You have been for more than a year. Is that different than the corporate focused, or is the healthcare focused one and the same?
It's a little bit different. Primarily our enterprise business before had been about selling devices to enterprises. We've had large installations, 40, 50,000 units. We had a several 100,000 unit deal with Target. But I think the difference is what our business model is behind our health business. So we're moving to one that's more based around what's called PMPM, per member per month, which is recurring in nature and more predictable. And I think one of the more interesting things is also looking at risk-sharing models where we happen to participate in share of any savings and healthcare costs that we achieve for our users.
Oh, wait, you're getting that now? You've done deals like that?
There's some promising steps. So we already have PMPM deals with Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and the recent partnership that we have with Dexcom and United Healthcare around diabetes management has the potential to move to a risk-sharing payment model.
So, and to that, are these the kind of contracts that will be really significant, more than, say, 1 or 2% of revenue per deal?
It's hard to say what the revenue outlook and mix is going to look like. I think we're taking a lot of concrete steps in 2018, and you can expect to see healthcare being a more meaningful part of our business going forward.
In terms of product mix going forward, you suggested that, and to commend you, inventory wasn't a big problem here. Usually when you've got this product change or something doesn't work the way you expected it to, inventory blows up in consumer electronics. It's been the death of many companies. That hasn't happened with you. Particularly difficult as you're moving into new products. Are there new products on the immediate horizon? I know you've got a deal with Adidas announced today.
Yeah, so definitely last year at this time, our inventory overhang was a huge issue, and it took us much of the first half of the year to work through that. I think one of the highlights coming into 2018 is that we're coming in with a relatively clean inventory position. And even with Ionic, we actually took a measured rollout to that launch. We're still launching in select APAC countries right now.
And you've got about $679 million in the bank in terms of cash. And the free cash flow, as you mentioned, it's bumpy from quarter to quarter as you lead up to a big fourth quarter. But the free cash flow numbers, not that bad. I mean, you've got a very long runway, it would seem to me, in this business. Even though you lost cash and you lost money in the quarter, you actually generated free cash flow.
Yeah, I think one of the things that investors can look forward to is us remaining disciplined on free cash flow. Even last year, despite our challenges, we only consumed about $25 million of cash. In 2018, our outlook is actually to break even on a free cash flow basis while we work through this transition.
Yeah, well, your stock is not reflecting some of the positive things in the quarter. They're reflecting a lot of the negative things. But, James, for the sake of all the people that can get fit, I hope it rectifies itself. James Park is the CEO of Fitbit. Very kind of you to join us today. We really appreciate it. Emily, back to you.
Thanks, Corey.
Thanks so much, Corey. Well, self-driving cars are getting ready for their biggest road test in California, that is. Starting on April 2nd, the state's Department of Motor Vehicles has authorized the first trials for consumer passenger rides without a safety driver at the wheel. Until now, self-driving cars needed a backup driver at the wheel. Participating vehicles will still have a backup driver, but this one will be patched in via remote to take over if needed. Coming up, Comcast sets the stage to take over Sky, challenging 21st Century Fox and Walt Disney with a $31 billion offer. We'll talk about this massive media bidding war next. This is Bloomberg. Netflix continues to ramp up its spending. Speaking at a conference, CFO David Wells says the streaming giant is set to spend upwards of $8 billion on content this year. Wells estimates Netflix will have 700 original shows and movies on the platform over the course of 2018. Well, everyone is shooting for Sky. Fox owns 39% and wants the rest. Disney has offered to buy much of Fox in order to get it. And now Comcast is offering $31 billion for the pay TV company. Early Tuesday morning, Sky said it was premature for anyone to be doing anything because it doesn't yet have a firm offer from Comcast. Here to break it all down for us, Paul Sweeney, head of North American research for Bloomberg Intelligence, and Bloomberg's LA bureau chief, Chris Palmieri. So first, Chris, lay out where each of these offers stand or doesn't stand for Sky.
Well, right now, as you mentioned, Fox is saying that there isn't an official offer out there, so there's really nothing they can commit to on their end, but they're going to have meetings, high-level board meetings and such, and most likely come out with their own proposal that would at least match what Comcast is offering. They have to. They can't sort of let a higher bid just stay out there.
So, Paul, let's talk a little bit about why Comcast would want Sky. Brian Roberts, CEO of Comcast, spoke on a call earlier today. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We have admired Sky for a long time. And when it became clear that not only was Sky for sale, but that every share was potentially going to have a change of ownership, we thought now was the time to make a superior cash proposal. We think Sky is an outstanding business.
So, Paul, read between the lines for us. What is he saying?
I think the big thing here for Brian Roberts is Comcast, while it's a fantastic company here in the U.S. with cable and entertainment assets, it is really underrepresented in the international marketplace. So it really doesn't have many businesses outside of the U.S. So the acquisition of Sky would dramatically increase their international exposure to the media business. When you think about the pay TV business in America, it is highly concentrated, it's saturated, it's maturing, it's cord cutting, so it's a very challenged business. Internationally, starting in the UK and in other parts of Europe where Sky operates, less penetration there on the pay TV side, more opportunity for growth. So if you're Brian Roberts and Comcast, it's a nice diversification move for you.
Well, Sky is definitely feeling the love, even if it's not on paper yet, in actual fact. Take a listen to what Disney CEO Bob Iger had to say about Sky a couple of months ago.
Sky is just an amazing platform. Not only does it provide consumers with a great consumer experience in terms of access to the programming, but also creates a lot of great programming from sports to news to all forms of entertainment. We've actually distributed a lot of our programming on Sky. We're extremely impressed with their user interface, their ability to attract and retain customers, the value proposition to their consumers, and that obviously is a real crown jewel in the assets of 21st Century Fox. And we certainly would be looking forward to having the opportunity to have Sky be part of our company.
Chris, does Iger really want to buy Sky?
Yes, absolutely. You almost have to feel sorry for him. He was in Paris today announcing this, $2 billion expansion of Disneyland there with, Star Wars Land, and then, across the channel comes these rebel fighters. He was saying just on Monday at a tech conference that, very similar to what Brian Roberts was saying, that, he needs international exposure. The TV business in Europe is not declining like it is here in the U.S., and there are assets like a direct-to-consumer service that Sky has launched that'll be very similar to what he's trying to do in the U.S. So there's a lot of things that Bob Iger wants in Sky, and so he'll likely have to work with the Murdochs on some sort of competitive bid.
So, Paul, how do you expect Fox and Disney to respond?
I think they will respond. I don't think they're going to let this Comcast bid just go, unchallenged. But, if you're Bob Iger, you really have to sit back and say, how bad do you really want to be in the European paid TV business? Because the price tag is getting pretty rich here, north of 12 times EBITDA. So I think probably Disney will come back and be the bidder to try to come over top of Comcast, simply because Disney would have a much cleaner regulatory path to approval, even though 21st Century Fox is already, practically a year into their transaction and the regulatory process. I think Disney will probably have a better, easier path, and they might be the preferred bidder here to the extent that they want to come back.
Chris, give us a little more detail on, what Fox is dealing with and UK regulators and how that plays into this equation.
Yeah, as Paul was saying, obviously, this is a deal the Murdochs have been trying to do for a long time, and they keep doing things that anger the UK regulators, and this issue is still unresolved, and it's several months away. Right now, Disney and Fox are sort of bound by the terms of their merger agreement. It would be difficult for Disney to just sort of make a bid for Sky without some sort of agreement between Fox and them. But certainly, from everything we've seen, it would be potentially an easier bid if Disney or Comcast directly acquired Sky, because there is so much sort of ill feeling about how the Murdochs have run things.
All right, well, we will keep watching this one. Chris Palmieri, our LA Bureau Chief, thank you, as well as Paul Sweeney of Bloomberg Intelligence. Coming up, the case of the U.S. government versus Microsoft heads to the highest court in the land. What it means for the future of your data stored overseas. That's next. And Bloomberg Technology is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Elisa Parenti in Washington, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Here's a check of your first word news. The same federal judge President Trump accused of mishandling fraud allegations against the now defunct Trump University has sided with him on a challenge to building a border wall with Mexico. Judge Gonzalo Curiel today rejected arguments by the state of California and advocacy groups that the administration overreached by waiving laws requiring environmental and other reviews before construction could begin. House Republicans say they don't plan on pursuing new legislation to ban assault weapons or expand background checks for gun sales. At a briefing today, Congressman Steve Scalise, himself a victim of gun violence, focused on the lack of preemptive action against alleged Florida school shooter Nicholas Cruz.
As people are contemplating new laws, I think the most important thing we can look at is what about all the laws that are already on the books that were not enforced, that were not properly implemented? You know, I think what angers me the most is when I see breakdowns with law enforcement. The FBI had this guy's name on a silver platter.
And a rare snow day in Italy. The city of Naples was hit by the heaviest snowfall in half a century as the Siberian weather front, nicknamed the Beast from the East, sends temperatures plunging across Europe. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Elisa Parenti. This is Bloomberg. Just after 5:30 p.m. here in Washington, Tuesday evening, 6:30 Wednesday morning in Hong Kong, where we're joined by Bloomberg's Sophie Kamarudin, who has a look at the markets. Good morning, Sophie.
Good morning, Elisa. We are setting up for a busy day in Asia as investors wake up to those hawkish comments from Jerome Powell, which saw Treasury yields and the dollar rise while gold is faltering as we see bets on faster policy tightening shaping up, and oil under pressure after dropping the most in 2 weeks as the IEA warns that explosive U.S. shale growth threatens rebalancing. Now, checking in on futures in Japan and Australia, we are looking at a softer start there. And on the data docket, PMI readings for China may show growth momentum slow due to the Lunar New Year holidays, as is expected to be the case for Japanese factory output. We're also going to get retail sales and housing data from Japan. And from India, the fourth quarter GDP report will be on deck. And in Hong Kong, we're going to get the first budget from Carrie Lam's administration. In Hong Kong, I'm Sophie Kamarudin. Up next, more with Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments Tuesday in a case that could have far-reaching impacts in the protection of Americans' data stored overseas. The government wants Microsoft to turn over emails stored in a giant server farm in Ireland. Microsoft says it doesn't have to, thanks to the Stored Communications Act of 1986. The case is a prime example of the law not keeping up with modern technology and has law enforcement officials and tech companies both in the U.S. and abroad eagerly awaiting the outcome. To get further into the case, I want to bring in Chris Calabrese, the VP of Policy at the Center for Democracy and Technology in Washington, D.C. Before that, he served as legislative counsel for the ACLU. Also with us, Dina Bass, Bloomberg Seattle bureau chief, who has been covering Microsoft for more than a decade. So, Dina, I'll start with you. Lay out what the argument is here and how this case will proceed.
Sure. So what Microsoft had argued was that the emails, because they were stored in Ireland, the U.S. government basically went straight to Microsoft, did an end run around the Irish government and said, give us the emails directly. Microsoft said that the Stored Communications Act, which, as you mentioned, was passed in 1986, doesn't apply in this case because it's an international law. They don't have to give over, material that's stored overseas. Now, the Stored Communications Act doesn't really answer that conclusively, which is why we've gotten to the Supreme Court with this case, because it was passed in 1986. And, that's 20 years before the advent of cloud services and 24 years before Microsoft started selling services in the cloud. So they've argued that since the U.S. government didn't go through the Irish government to request the emails, they don't have to turn them over, and they've refused.
So, Chris, your organization filed a brief supporting Microsoft. Why?
Well, we're worried what the practical result of this is going to be. If we have a world in which any government can reach into any other nation and grab data that's there, not only is that chaos for people's privacy, it also undermines the entire idea of cloud computing, which is to say that you get the same services in the cloud as you would if you kept information on your own servers. And if you've got nations reaching into each other's sovereign borders and grabbing that data, that's manifestly not true. And that's not good for privacy, and it's not good for U.S. cloud computing.
So, Dina, that said, several justices expressed support for the government's side, and there are some real concerns there. Talk to us about how the justices responded to both sides today.
Sure. I think you had the justices pushing back a little bit on what Chris said, fundamentally asking about the technology and saying, well, why does Microsoft have to decide to store this data overseas? And as Chris mentioned, it's part of the whole value proposition of cloud services. And it has to do with latency. Otherwise, if you're in Ireland and your data is stored in the U.S., it slows things down. But there was some pushback on that. I think you had Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito pushing back on the idea that this could really impair U.S. law enforcement, and wouldn't this really hamper investigations by U.S. law enforcement? Chief Justice Roberts saying, well, I mean, my emails could be stored, halfway across the world just because I ask for it. On the other side, I think you had some of the other justices, Justice Sotomayor and Justice Ginsburg, pushing back on the ways in which the law is just outdated and saying, Justice Sotomayor asking, should we not just wait for Congress to update this law? And there has been a bipartisan bill, introduced called the Cloud Act that would address many of these issues. And it's one that the technology companies and the government seem to agree on. Now, the challenge is, A, the Supreme Court doesn't usually wait for that sort of thing when they have a case before it, and B, the bill may not get passed. It's not the first one of its kind that's been introduced. The other ones haven't gone anywhere.
Chris, is there fear of U.S. retaliation by customers here?
I think there's a real worry. Certainly, Microsoft has been trying to make the business case for a long time that you can trust that you can trust them, and it's not just Microsoft. All the cloud companies have. They took a real hit when it came to the Snowden revelations and the worry that the NSA was spying on these services. If it becomes the norm that you aren't protected by your own privacy laws in your own countries, well, it's not unreasonable to think customers are going to look for domestic providers that may be more attuned to their own laws. And this really is a problem that stems from an out-of-date law, one that should have been updated a long time ago, and one that, as we heard, has bipartisan support and really can be updated. It's just, congressional inertia at its worst.
Dina, when do you expect we'll get a ruling?
I think we're waiting for the summer, Chris. I don't know if you have different information on that.
I'm hearing June, but, deciding when the Supreme Court is going to do anything is really up to them and not us. But certainly it'll be by the end of the term, which is the beginning of June.
So, Dina, that last question, obviously, you mentioned some new legislation. At what point will we see, a fresher sort of framework that addresses the way technology is actually used today and addresses things like the cloud?
Well, the new legislation that was proposed by Senators Orrin Hatch and a few other senators it gives the Justice Department a lot of what it wants, in the sense that it says that the Justice Department has the right to demand this sort of data that's stored overseas, but it gives the technology companies a legal framework to challenge that. To say, when a piece of data or a lot of data is stored in a country whose laws don't allow for the same sort of things that ours do, to ask a court to take that into account. And Chris mentioned this issue of whether companies will stop using U.S. providers and use local. I think there's a flip to that Microsoft has brought up as well. What happens with a foreign company, let's say Alibaba, which is building data centers in the U.S.? The question Microsoft has raised is, in that case, what happens if the Chinese government says, well, we want data that's stored in Alibaba's server that's in Alibaba's data center that's in California? It brings up a whole sort of set of issues of what other countries will do if the U.S. does this as well.
All right. Dina Bass, our Seattle Bureau Chief, thank you, as well as Chris Calabrese of the Center for Democracy and Technology. Thank you both for joining us. Well, in the latest revolving door in technology, Pinterest has named its first chief operating officer. The company is aiming to scale its ad business internationally ahead of a potential IPO, and hiring Francoise Broger, a former executive at Square and Google, for the position. Broger was most recently Square's business lead, overseeing the company's revenue products, international expansion, customer support, and partnerships. She joined the electronics payment company in 2013 after several years at Google. And another revolving door story, Frances Frey, the woman Uber brought on to help clean house in a punishing year, is leaving the company after just 8 months. Frey was on the management committee running the company until the board selected ousted CEO Travis Kalanick's replacement, Dara Khosrowshahi. Frey will continue to serve as an advisor to Uber as she embarks on her own project to devise a leadership development program for executives centering on women and minorities. Coming up, we'll bring you coverage from Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. Google's top AR exec explains how the company is taking its augmented reality system to the public. This is Bloomberg. At Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, Google talked to developers about how it is bringing its augmented reality system, AR Core, out of beta with new features. Amit Singh, Vice President of VR and AR Business and Operations at Google, joined Bloomberg Television to talk about the release of AR Core with our very own Caroline Hyde. Take a listen.
AR Core is a developer platform for augmented reality on top of Android. What we're excited about is now 100 million phones have AR Core in them. We've certified those phones to build high-performance AR experience for developers. So phones like Samsung's phones like S8, S9, S7, LG phones, Xiaomi phones. We're actually also bringing AR Core to China. And so we'll have this global footprint for developers to build really delightful experiences. Entertainment experiences where you can have a stormtrooper standing next to you from Star Wars, or go shopping where you can, get a couch right for your living room and make sure it fits, or actually education where you could have kids, walk around the solar system using just the phone that they have. So very, very excited that it's open for developers and they can build for it now.
Where, therefore, are you likely to see hits? Are you hoping for the next Pokemon Go? You're hoping for money to be made off of some of these games?
No, I think right now it's all about, enabling developers to make AR experiences. Some of them will be games, the next Pokemon Go. Some of it will be utility experiences, shopping. Some will be educational experiences, or just personal expression, right? Hanging out with the stormtroopers or whatever. We see that this being a very broad platform that people will build many experiences towards. And over time, money will come when there is usage, there's attention, and actually it's adding value to you as a consumer.
And when it's across the Android platform, how are we going to see this regionally broken down? Is this something, of course, that needs especially powerful phones, but is it something that can be targeted to the emerging markets as well?
Absolutely. AR Core currently works on high-end phones because it needs certain performance, right? It needs a certain powerful chip, a certain type of camera. But we are, over time, going to build that not just for high-end phones, but also to medium-range and low-end phones. You can expect over the next couple of years, billions of phones will have AR capability built into them.
And how, therefore, you oversee VR as well, of course. When is that going to become more of a reality? When does it lower its price point? When can we buy the hardware that will make it much more user-friendly? So
VR, that's where the team started in virtual reality and has now, added augmented reality as part of its remit. Virtual reality, the difference is it takes you somewhere. Augmented reality brings digital objects into your physical world. Virtual reality and virtual reality capturing of the real world is where we are leaning in. So imagine being able to come to Mobile World Congress simply by putting on a headset. Now, wouldn't that be a lot more convenient, and easier? So we're seeing that as a use case. We've seen that in education. We have this product called Expeditions. We've rolled it out to students in the UK and the US. And there, instead of going on a physical field trip, you can actually put on a very simple cardboard headset and go on a virtual field trip. We have 500 curated field trips and more coming. And so the idea of going places is what really is resonating in VR. And we are building capture systems, cameras. We're building headsets with cardboard on the low end, and Daydream, which is a high-performance product for mobile phones, where you can simply slip the phone into a beautiful, comfortable cloth-based viewer, which is lightweight, and then go somewhere, whether that's a YouTube VR video or taking expeditions with your kid.
This obviously works within your ecosystem. You're talking about a YouTube video. How important is this to Google as a whole?
No, overall, AR and VR are platforms for immersive computing. Computing that works more like we do as humans, where instead of looking at a small rectangle glass in 2D, you're actually interacting with computing in 3D. So Google Lens, for example, is one of those technologies where the phone recognizes what it sees. What plant is that? What a cute pair of shoes, where can I get them? The idea of recognition and then enhancing that or augmenting that in the real world is a fundamental, new immersive platform. VR is on one end, where you can just don a set of goggles and go somewhere. AR is on the other side, where through a phone you can bring objects in your physical world as if they were off that world. So immersive computing is the way I would describe both VR, AR, and Lens. And the idea is we are investing in all three of them to bring them at scale to consumers.
And are you behind the curve, having seen AR kit come out that much faster? Is this something you're in a race to keep up with, or do you think you've always been able to be there for developers?
Honestly, we've been investing in AR with Project Tango since 2014. So we recognize augmented reality as an important next platform for immersion. And then over time, we recognized we didn't need the hardware part of Project Tango. We're doing everything in software and on phones. And frankly, AR Core brings many of the same capabilities to Android that AR Kit brings to the iPhone.
Google's Amit Singh there with our own Caroline Hyde in Barcelona. Coming up, we have more coverage from Mobile World Congress, what the man who leads McAfee is doing to protect all that. Next, this is Bloomberg. A follow-up on a story we covered on Monday. Facebook wants to set the record straight, saying presidential candidate Donald Trump spent slightly more per ad on the site than his rival Hillary Clinton did ahead of the general election in 2016. This after a former employee wrote an article for Wired that asserted Trump was targeting people in more rural areas and likely paid less per ad to reach those people. According to a chart tweeted out by Facebook executive Andrew Bosworth, from June to November of 2016, Trump actually spent slightly more for reach in most of those months. Facebook clarified that Bosworth's chart, though, only counted the price of ads based on the number of people those ads were guaranteed to reach. When it comes to cybersecurity, one of the names that jumps to mind is McAfee. The security solutions company has been at the forefront of protecting computers and networks for years. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde caught up with McAfee CEO Chris Young at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, where they talked about the state of cybersecurity and how you can protect the Internet of Things.
We're doing a few things. Number one, really interesting innovation. We took the Amazon Alexa skills, and we now have voice command capability for one of our products called the Secure Home Platform, which this year we actually announced a partnership with Telefonica, where we're basically bringing security to the home router. One of the big issues that we see as homes have connected devices is that basically those devices can be attacked. We see cameras being recruited into botnets, and we've seen those things happen. So the Secure Home Platform allows us to extend security to any connected device in the household, and using the voice commands now, we can make it really simple so people could just say it and have security inherent in their home.
It's really interesting. We're sat here in Europe, and quite often it's felt that maybe Europeans are a little more data sensitive, particularly in Germany, which you flew through. Do you find it geographically spread as to where the demand is for these sorts of helps from you?
We see the developed world operating very similarly, and the attack types are similar in different countries that are developed countries. That being said, as you pointed out, the privacy laws and regulations and expectations around privacy tend to be quite different between and among countries. Particularly the difference between U.S. and European countries is real. But the good news is international standards like GDPR, for example, will actually drive, I think, good data privacy standards that will permeate countries around the world, including the U.S., and raise the bar for security, which I think is ultimately the goal.
The bar needs to be raised because the malware is becoming yet ever more present. How are you finding attack rates at the moment? Are we seeing it still grow exponentially?
Yeah, we continue to see, I would say cyber attacks are one of those items that continues to rise. And attackers are becoming more creative. So they're not just using malware, they're finding ways to compromise your username and password so they can get into your accounts without even using malware. And so the attackers are becoming incredibly creative. They're executing their attacks faster, more broadly across different devices. It's one of the things we're doing with the Secure Home platform is trying to protect multiple devices in the home. And so the problem is growing. It's becoming, in some ways, harder to detect. And so part of the goal for McAfee is to take some of that complexity out of the factor for the user, whether they're in the home or whether it's a business user as well.
And how, therefore, are we likely to see increases in attacks as we see yet more and more devices come online? Internet of Things is what everyone's discussing. There must be, therefore, so many points of entry and points of weakness.
Yeah, more devices mean more attack points of entry, or like what we like to say is there's more surface area for attack. You know, a good example is that Mirai botnet was used to attack Dyn a couple of years ago. You know, we don't hear about Mirai in the headlines as much now, but Mirai is alive and well. It's actually adding new devices every few minutes. And so these large-scale botnets that go after connected devices continue to proliferate, and you know that's going to spawn new types of attacks, but it does point the finger to why we need to make sure that we've got good, strong security that extends all the way into the home, and not just on PCs, but to protect all devices in the home.
Chris Young there, CEO of McAfee, speaking to Bloomberg and our own Caroline Hyde at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder, we're live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.